everyone. Welcome to Risk Roundup. As digital technology fundamentally transforms the innovation cycle, it seems that there is a disconnect between the demand for innovation in digital technology and the ability to execute the development successfully. The growing demand for digitalization has increased a need for the newest and best software package by not only consumers, but each and every entity across nations, its government, industries, organizations, and academia. This growing demand is driving software developers to take shortcuts, use outdated code, or not fully test new products in order to get the product to the market or end user quickly. This raises the risk of software that are not sufficiently vetted against security vulnerabilities or system compatibility. In addition, there are older versions of many softwares that are in use across nations with its outdated operating systems, which have either already become unsupported by their respective vendors or at some point in the near future would become unsupported. These raises critical security risk, as such security vulnerabilities will likely go unpatched, and they will often be the first vulnerable spot cyber criminals will focus on when trying to obtain access to the systems across entities. To discuss the software security risk and security first architecture, I'm delighted to welcome Anantha Bangalore. Anantha is a Chief Technology Officer and a Principal Architect of an award winning patented security solution. Welcome, Anantha. We are delighted to have you on Risk Roundup.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Jayshree. I
Jayshree.
appreciate the opportunity.
So, Anantha, would you like to give a little background about your initiatives that we were just talking before the session about the technology that you have developed and the startup that you are working with? Would you like to give some background on that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So,
So,
me and a
me and a
colleague of
colleague of
mine,
mine,
Dr.
Dr.
Earl,
Earl,
we started a security product company called SCIT, and it stands for Self-Cleansing Intrusion Tolerance. So fundamentally, what we believe that intrusions are inevitable, which I know most people believe. And when intrusions occur, bad guys are in the system for days, weeks, and months. And then once the bad guys are in the system, typically they are very hard to detect because they hide their tracks well. Making sure that any of these sort of your IDS, IPS, firewalls don't pick them up. We also know from all the attacks that have been happening recently, whether it's your Target or Anthem or OPM attacks, by the time the bad guys were identified in the system, it took a substantial long period of time. Pandya says it's about 8 months before the bad guys are actually identified. So clearly, there is a lot of time for them to do a substantial amount of damage, steal things, etc. So we thought of actually fundamentally looking at security from a different perspective, right? So detection has always been a hard problem, right? And the problem is, I think these days attackers have a lot more tools at their disposal in terms of new Trojan kits, all sorts of toolkits which allows them to generate new malware. In fact, I think McAfee says almost 100,000 new malware every day, right? So it is very hard for detection-based systems to sort of keep track with those kind of signatures, right? In order to sort of find new things. So fundamentally, moving target defense is sort of a new area of cybersecurity, which focuses on making it much harder for the attacker to get a foothold in your system, right? And SCIT is sort of based on the notion of using fault tolerance for cybersecurity. Right? And the goal here is, if you were to constantly change the attack surface of your system, then we are making it harder. So basically, what SCIT fundamentally does is we constantly revert your system back to a known pristine state. And when we are talking about, if we could do this in minutes, we could do it in a few hours, depending upon it all depends upon how much you want to protect your crown jewels, right? Because there is a little bit of cost associated with some of these things. And so, but the idea here is to constantly rotate your system to pristine state, which basically means an attacker gets into your system, then they're kicked out, which means they have to redo their work. Now, the side effect of this is because you're forcing them to redo their work, your existing reactive systems, such as your IDS and IPS, are more likely to pick up that activity than if this were not. So that's sort of the overall concept of SCIT.
No, that is a very good information, and I think this would be very useful for the security community. But let me ask you, how effective is this software that you have developed, this technology?
I mean, we believe it's quite effective, and we have used it so far. SCIT's been implemented in a variety of ways at Army. We have implemented this at SPAWAR, which is Navy, as well, and a couple of different types of systems, data ingestion systems. We are currently working on doing some experimental study on applying this to the Navy Tactical Cloud. We have applied this to, for example, DNS type systems. We have applied this to typical e-commerce type web systems as well. So we find this to be extremely effective in terms of, in fact, we just had a Telos, which is a company which is based out in Washington, D.C., which supports the DoD community quite a bit in terms of security, penetration testing, things like that. So they just did an evaluation of our system. The challenge there was, we had a 3 gigabyte file that was hiding behind a web server, a Tomcat-based application system. And our challenge to the Telos people were, okay, steal this, basically, right? And we, on purpose, created a Tomcat server that was not patched, which had known vulnerabilities in it. And we also told them, look, how SCIT works, and that they have to expect a certain rotation. So as part of the test, they got in and they were able to find the vulnerability, and they started stealing the file. They wrote a script and they started stealing the file. But guess what? They constantly get kicked off. Okay, and so they had to redo their script. So something that would have taken them 1 or 2 attempts to steal the file, they had to make hundreds of attempts to be able to get it. So clearly, and this was, this because they actually knew how SCIT worked, and so they were able to constantly modify. But imagine if this were running and people actually didn't know this was running. So this would be making life a lot harder. So even in terms of data exfiltration, which SCIT doesn't prevent data exfiltration, but it is making it so much more harder for the attackers to steal large amounts of data, right? And so if we had an IDS system in front of SCIT right now as part of this test, the IDS system would have seen, okay, there's somebody making too many attempts here, and there's something hinky going on. So the point is, and I'd be happy to share this study with you. In fact, we have it published, and I can share that with you. So that's one use case as to how SCIT can help in sort of for some of these new things that are happening in terms of the attacks and stuff.
No, that is very, I think, useful information, because these attackers, like you say, that if they are not able to stay on the system after hacking for a longer time, and they have to continuously, try to get into the system, that would prevent a lot of damage that they could do if they were there for a longer time. So most certainly, I would like to evaluate all the information that you can provide me, and that is, I think, very useful initiative that you are working on, and good luck for that to you. And so let's start our discussion now. What are your observations and thoughts on growing demand for digital technology and software industry's ability to cope with its demand, design, and delivery?
So, clearly, I think, as you rightly pointed out in the intro, right? Clearly the demand for sort of the digital delivery in terms of what people want to see is growing. But I think the problem is security is still, in my opinion, sort of treated as sort of the ugly stepchild. In the sense that it's still not being given the importance it needs to be given, right? Bruce Shiner, I don't know if you heard of Bruce Shiner, is a very popular man in the encryption community. He has a saying. It says, if you give the users a choice between dancing pigs and security, they will always pick dancing pigs. Right. That's sort of where the motivation is. That's where, especially in this today's world of agile development, wherein there are 2-week scrums. And so the focus is fundamentally largely around, sort of the functionality, and DevOps is clearly gaining a lot of traction. Again, when people talk about DevOps, they're usually only talking about DevOps in the context of, more frequent releases to production. But security is always sort of shortchanged.
Yes, security is an afterthought, and people are just focused on functionality. You are absolutely right. Now, for the benefit of our global viewers and listeners, can you describe the creation of a software or system architecture just very briefly? What is the process that involves the software or system architecture?
Yeah, so basically, in terms of creating a software system architecture, the process. I mean, I can sort of give you examples on how it's done. In the federal government, when I spend a lot of time on it, it's basically going, 3-tier architecture. Basically going from making sure that you have user stories, for various pieces, and then you create story points, and agile is used heavily, and then you make sure your acceptance criteria and all of those things that you have to do in terms of breaking it up into various chunks and making sure that each of those chunks are done. There is a buy off, all that stuff. So that's all good things, right? And making sure that DevOps, in fact, these days DevOps being, I think, is a really good thing, right? Because having that platform ability to sort of release things in terms of having continuous integration, continuous deployment, having automated testing as part of your release cycles. That's also something that we do a lot, which is also extremely important. Automation testing, which is part of your DevOps framework, is also extremely important in terms of regression testings or unit testings or any kind of other functionality testing. All of those things are fantastic, right? We are also bringing in things like what Netflix has done. I think Netflix has been in the forefront of doing this concept of using something like Chaos Monkey, for example, wherein you are able to do some, you assume that your systems are always going to fail, and then put testing for failure or fail fast, so you can actually design systems to be much more resilient, is also something that we've been doing. So from a system development perspective, this is sort of the things that we do in terms of pushing things or developing things. But the challenge, to go back to what I was saying, the challenge being the amount of time to do appropriate security testing is still fundamentally a problem. And the problem is security also doesn't lend itself into sort of this DevOps type framework very easily, though. You could do security testing in terms of integrating a static code analyzer, right? Making sure as part of your development process, you are doing, using a static analyzer, doing some security testing. Problem is, static analyzers, 90% are false positives because there's no context, right? And then you could potentially be fixing problems which may not be real problems at all. Now, is that a efficient way of spending time? It's probably not, right? And then you have dynamic testing, which is a little bit more time consuming because now you're looking at penetration testing type stuff. And that actually doesn't really cover all the possible scenarios, right? Because you can't really test all the possible paths of your program. You're going to test a few scenarios only. So that's the problem of having to do a comprehensive security testing that can be integrated into these sort of 2-week or 3-week sprints is just a very hard concept. And hence, you actually have to rethink in terms of building security into the platform itself. And that's why we believe something like SCIT, because especially given today's, everybody, right, including federal government wants to be like Facebook. They want to be releasing 50 releases per day, right? Which basically means you will have some vulnerabilities that's going to get released. That's just going to happen, right? So if you assume that because you want to have these fast releases and you're going to have to deal with some vulnerabilities, then if you had something like a SCIT underneath that, at least you're making it harder for the attacker to take advantage of those vulnerabilities. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. No, I understand that. Now, it seems that there are multiple frameworks and multiple different methodologies for software or system architecture. And it is said that the choice of architecture methodology can increase security efficiency or diminish it. What process is used by entities across industries when it comes to choosing the architecture methodology? Is it specific to any particular sector or an industry?
Yeah, so it depends, right? I mean, again, in terms of methodology, people use various standards to measure against, right? For example, in the federal government, they use 853. 853 is the NIST standard, which is sort of used for controls to measure the security, in terms of how secure a system is. So there are various controls. Clearly, there is PCI in terms of when you go to the financial sector, right? So there are sort of these various standards that people use, and we also use other standards such as something called NIAP, which is a DISA or NSA based compliance. So that sort of so it varies industry to industry as to what they say or what they want to use in terms of how in terms of internal compliance. But compliance is only the starting point, right? Basically, I think we are at a point, and we know in terms of what we are saying that. If you are only going to secure a system based upon a particular standard compliance, that clearly is not going to work. And we've seen that. So my perspective is compliance is just a starting point. Don't ignore that. But if you think that you're safe because you're mapping against this standard or this standard, clearly that's not working anymore. And I
Yeah.
think there is a growing awareness that, hey, just because I'm compliant with 853 means I'm secure. Absolutely not. You have to go a lot more beyond that.
That is very true. Now, how would you define that this is a good security architecture? If you were a decision maker, what would make you feel that, looking at all the different architectures that are out there and the process that you go through to choose the which one to use, how would you define that? Okay, this is a good security architecture.
Yeah, so basically you have to do the fundamentals in terms of defining security architecture, right? I mean, you want to make sure that you have, if I would look at things, for example, these days, instead of trying to sort of boil the ocean and try to, implement all sorts of expensive tools, I would really start looking at the data side, right? First, you want to have a reasonable, you need to have, you need to know what you have in terms of assets. I would start from there. I mean, it's amazing how many companies and organizations don't even know what kind of assets do they have. And in terms of assets, I'll sort of classify them, data, your application in terms of what applications you have, right? I would sort of make sure that I have a good understanding of those assets. Once I have that, then I would sort of let's look at data, for example. All data doesn't need to have the same level of security. So and sort of classify them based on, what kind of security I need to apply, and sort of look at this, and then correspondingly, make some, what do you call, sort of add controls, make sure that, okay, this is my crown jewels, I need to add a lot more security around this, I would sort of make those things. Authentication and authorization is clearly, as two-factor authentication is again another area where I would put a lot of attention, because a lot of the issues that we've had is because of poor hygiene in terms of having lousy passwords, and things that are not paid a lot of attention even today. So making sure that two-factor authentication is implemented in some, is also sort of critical for an organization, right? So data security, authentication, authorization, compliance is another area, right? A lot of things happen these days in compliance, wherein people, people install a server, and they go there, well, I am going to open a firewall port here, and they forget about this. Bringing in automation, right? Using new tools such as Chef and Puppet and Ansible, wherein you are no longer provisioning these servers manually. You're using these tools, which can then be, you can version control these things, and they're all to a particular standard. So when I bring up a server with, X operating system and this version of the software, one, there is standardization. Two, I'm also making sure that, I'm not going there and manually opening this port, because it's all set to a particular standard, and there is a little more security around those things. So these are all the various things I would do in terms of creating a security architecture. And when I look at the tools, again, I think also I would when my software guys, when they want to implement and they want to go, hey, I want to use Angular, I want to use Node. I mean, these are all new technologies that are out there. I mean, very, very sexy. They make your interface look really good, but I want to also ask the hard questions, right? Saying, great, but I also want to understand what the security vulnerabilities are. I want to ask the hard questions, and what kind of security testing has been done on this stuff? What is the community saying out there? What kind of testing we have to do, instead of just making a choice purely based on the look and feel of something. Those are sort of the things that I would look into in terms of security architecture.
No, that is good information, and I think that's a good way of dealing with the security softwares and architecture. Now, Anantha, you know that, and I think probably everyone acknowledges this, that most developers have a very poor understanding of security and have never been incentivized to fundamentally think of incorporating security into the design of any software or a system. What are your observations so far, dealing with developers that are working with you or, for you over the years?
That's exactly right. Problem is, even in the computer science curriculum of most universities, there is hardly any emphasis put on secure coding. Unfortunately, and so what happens is a lot of the kids come out of school. I mean, they can program, but they don't know what it means to write secure code, and there is no incentivization around it, right? Like I said, fundamentally, the emphasis has always been functionality. In your typically when you look at your sort of user stories around 2 week sprints, there's a lot of emphasis on functionality, but there's very little where it talks about security at all. And on the flip side of this, the security folks in most organizations, don't come from a programming background. They either come from a sort of a compliance background, or they are system admin types who sort of make the transition into security. And what happens is, in any given organization, when they're about to sort of really make a release to production, the security folks run some kind of a tool. I mean, everybody has a tool, they run a tool, but they're really not able to sort of classify the results in any kind of meaningful way. And then they go to the developers and ask developers, hey, what do you think? This says it's a critical. What do you think? And the developers, will say, well, I don't know. I mean, they'll say it's a false positive. So either it sort of gets missed because they tend to, even if it, they'll tend to wrongly classify things. And there is also no real understanding of, well, what's a real problem, what's not a real problem, right? How do you figure that out, right? And then what testing do you do to actually figure that out? How do you incorporate security testing as part of your development environment? A lot of these kind of things don't exist from a process perspective. It's mostly based on tools. Right now, they run a tool, the tool says something, they go fix it. Nobody actually understands if those things are real or not, and then they say, hey, we are fine, we are secure. There's a false sense of security, and then things get pushed. So that gap has to be bridged. Now, some of it is education, right? But there also has to be an understanding that from the at the CEO level, that look, there is going to be a time commitment that's involved in order to make sure your system is secure, which means there has to be time commitment involved for more comprehensive security testing.
Yes, yes, no, and your observation is very to the point that when they are going through the college, in the college curriculum, there is nothing about security. So students are not learning that, and that is a cause of concern. I think we need to pay attention to integrating security as a part of the curriculum, so that students who are learning how to do programming and coding, they learn how to make it secured right from there. So that is something we'll have to work with, and we'll have to see how we can integrate that into the education system. But now, Anantha, there are so many different security methodologies, security centric methodologies. So choosing which security centric methodology to follow for software development is crucial, as it will be the basis on which a security architect will potentially have to work with for many, many years. The wrong security framework can lead to a great headache for software engineers and can lead to very poor security positions. Can you share with our global viewers and listeners what are the existing methodologies for security centric architecture that are widely used and that are very effective?
So, from my perspective, from what I've seen, there is no standardization on this, Jayshree. I mean, people sort of use them, it's very scattered, right? So people tend to follow, I mean, things like defense in depth and things, these are sort of commonly understand ways of applying security. But it's not applied in any kind of a uniform way, even in the federal government, right? Even within various agencies within federal government. There is no common standard in which, or a common security framework that they apply. It's largely based on, okay, well, we understand there has to be defense in depth, which means I need to make sure there is security at the perimeter. I need to make sure there are enough coverage, for the there is sort of a separation of services, et cetera, et cetera. So sort of the normal things people do. But I think we need to get smarter than that, I think. And that's why I think fundamentally a few things that we need to look into. And you will see that most people, when they recommend these days, they say, look at data. Data, I mean, what are you trying to protect, right? You look at data first. Why don't you look at data and then go from there, sort of work backwards and saying, You don't want to apply all the same level of security to everything else. So look at data first, and then there are also critical things. I mean, there are also sort of fundamental things you have to do. Is things like two-factor authentication. Don't rely on passwords. Make sure, these days, yeah, systems don't live in isolation. Every system is linked to many other systems, and you may be completely you may have the best security around system, but guess what, you're also touching lots of other systems in the outside world. For example, the opium attack, right? Opium attack was the bad guys were able to get in the system because they compromised the credentials of a contractor. The contractor was not maintaining proper hygiene in terms of username and password. They were able to get in there, jump into something that as critical as the OPM network, unable to get those. So this is the problem, though, right? The problem I see is it is sort of being applied in a very haphazard way. Patching is another, right? I mean, everybody says, good hygiene means you got to be able to patch your systems. It doesn't happen because it's not that easy of a problem, because if you patch a system, that system may potentially break, and that has, which means there's more money involved in trying to fix that. So what happens is they'll try to ignore it, and not enough importance is given to those patches. So there are a lot of issues in terms of applying a framework or a methodology, and it's usually sort of make it up as you go, basically, from what I have seen.
Yeah, no, that is the challenge, because like you said that, there are no standards and everyone has their own different methodology. And cybersecurity is something where, even if your security is strong, but if there are, other vulnerabilities with the vendors or suppliers or contractors, then, it doesn't matter if your system is secure or not, because you are at risk. So that is a very critical risk, and I think there needs to be effort to develop some common standards, common global standards for security architecture, so that everyone has responsibility and accountability to develop very secure architecture and very secure framework. So I hope that and nations work towards that, and we'll have to wait and see how that goes forward. But now it seems many methods have been suggested over the years for security architecture. Each has a similar goal: build security into the system as a part of the architecture. Many times, security is bolted onto the end of software or system development, or as an upgrade after the system is completed. Each framework and taxonomy has a different way of representing the security element of the system. Now, we know this is a problem when you make security as an afterthought and when it is not integrated right from the beginning. So, what are your observations when you work with your clients, or when you work with other corporations? What do you feel is everyone's effort towards we talked briefly that everyone is focused on functionality, and security is not much more of a focus with everyone, because there is so much rush to let out your applications or softwares or programs that people normally don't focus about security. So what are your observations about that?
I think so. I think it's changing. I think it all comes down to accountability. I think for a long period of time, the accountability on security, was in the hands of, not even at a CISO level. It was really sort of deeply buried under, some kind of a security architect or security person down below the chain, and there was really no accountability if bad things happen to the CEO level, right? Clearly, that's changing now, because there is clearly the CEOs are now being held accountable in terms of bad things that are happening by shareholders, and even in the government organizations, the directors of various agencies. So that is a great start, which means there is going to be a much more focused approach towards security. There is going to be a better understanding of what the risks are and what they have to do. So that is a really positive moment that's going on. There's also talk about CISOs now being directly attached to the COOs, because it's the money. Ultimately, it all comes down to money. And and so there is some movement going towards there, which means there's going to be more money flowing towards security. And so because, as you know, security is a question of risk, right? And it's always hard to sort of quantify that risk for an organization, clearly, right? So now I think there is a better understanding, and I think that sort of conversation is fundamentally changing. it's a lot easier for somebody like me to go and make that argument without having to do a business case of the risk. And and so I think that's changing, in my opinion. And I think that's probably what's going to sort of allow people to bring in more innovation into security, because clearly, as you might have seen, right, bringing innovation to security is always hard. Though people don't like hey, it's working. Why do I have to pay more money for a tool that because I may not see the benefits? Well, that's the problem in security, right? But I think clearly they're understanding that yes, you need more innovation. You need to start thinking things differently. This is a big challenge. It's a question of a lot of companies do understand. It's a question of when, and that's not a question of if anymore, basically.
Yes, no, I do see some positive signs, but it still seems that security is still viewed as the job of the security division. In addition, it is widely believed that security hinders company innovation, productivity, and limits the ability of the business to take risk. I mean, that also we see that even I mean, there are, sporadic cases where we see that, there are positive signs that, they are taking security very, uh, you know, very strongly and they want to make a difference. So, but what do you think enterprises should be doing differently? As we talked, in the last few minutes, that we need to make sure that security is part of the software development right from the beginning. We have to choose the right frameworks, right methodology. But what else enterprises can do to make sure that security is not just a part of the security division? Because see, security, cyber security, geospace security, and space security, everything is integrated now because of the connected computers and computer code and internet, that everything is connected. I mean, what we are not just talking about cyber security, we are talking about the physical security of the infrastructure and everything that we have developed in the geospace, that we are talking about it, that is also integrated. And the space satellites are also integrated with the security. So what the softwares, what they are developing, they are so critical that it's very important for them to understand that what they are putting in, what they are releasing to the public or to the enterprises or the government or all the entities across NGIOA, that it is not just going to impact the cybersecurity, it's going to impact the physical geosecurity as well as the space security. So what should enterprises be doing, to make sure that, they are doing everything in their power?
Absolutely. So I think you make a great point, right? I think because security has also been fundamentally treated as a technology problem, right? It's not a technology; it's a business problem. So I think fundamentally the leaders of the various organizations, the heads of the various organizations, need to be brought in early on, and then talk about the risks involved here, like you say. The systems are widely interconnected. You have one system, then you have access to lots of other systems. So that understanding of risk within your system, within your enterprise, is what may happen. And you sort of start off from there. Make sure that the shareholders of your company or the CEO of the company, they're sort of brought, you sort of talk to them in the, make sure that this is a critical piece of what needs to happen, not just something that somebody has to do. Like a lot of CEOs think, hey, security, what are security was not built in. What are you talking about, right? I mean, but that's not the conversation. They need to be brought in early on. They need to be talked about risks, and you need to tell them of all the various risks that are part of what might happen. And then from that point onwards, I think it gets better in terms of the investment that needs to be made, in terms of the time that needs to be made, in terms of making sure things are done, in terms of how systems are built, in terms of security being integrated across the enterprise in a top-down way, right? Because this has to be ultimately a top-down conversation. It cannot just be a technology conversation that's just coming from the bottom when people are just adding on new tools and firewalls. It can be at that level. It has to come from the top-down level. There has to be a fundamental understanding of risks involved here in terms of all the various things that can happen. I mean, And then you have a basis for making sure that the right things are applied across the entire enterprise, basically.
Yes, no, I think it's very true, and the challenge is that inspire. I mean, even though we see that there is some positive development across many organizations, most decision makers still view security as a technology problem, like you said, and they think that this can be solved by buying a few off-the-shelf software packages. So that is still a challenge, and it will take time to overcome those challenges and to go towards something very constructive and positive for the security community. So I think, Anantha, you are very involved with the security first architecture. So can you define what, I mean, just say very briefly for our benefit of our global viewers and listeners, what is a security first architecture and why does it matter?
I mean, clearly, security first architecture, from my perspective, right? When we design a system, fundamentally, we start the conversation around, what frameworks do we need to use for, in terms of building our system? How can we make this better? Well, we talk about mobile responsive. We talk about all of these, great things, right? I mean, we talk about cloud. A lot of people mistakenly assume, okay, I'm going to Amazon, well, I'll be secure because Amazon is providing security. It doesn't quite work that way, basically, right? Because, for example, people really don't have an understanding, for example, well, Amazon is infrastructure provider, which means they are responsible for only such and such. The application is still your responsibility, right? Some people understand what those differences are between an infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, roles and responsibilities and things like that. But a lot of people don't. Same when they go into mobile first, they go, oh, I want to create a mobile first, system, which means I want to use jQuery, I want to use Angular, I want to use Node, I want to use all of these wonderful frameworks that are out there that will make my site really look. Same thing around backend systems. Very rarely have I come across wherein people ask the question, okay, you want to use Node. Can you tell me why is Node secure? What testing has been done around there? How many times has anybody sort of broken Node or take vulnerabilities that exist in Node? It's an open source software. What's sort of the patching mechanism here? These are not questions that are asked upfront, though. These are maybe asked questions a lot of later on in the process, but at that point, it's too late for you to go change some of these things. It's too baked in. Fundamentally, I think those are some of the things that we should pay a little more attention. I think you should have the security person, even when we talk about DevOps, and then there is security is being integrated within DevOps, but it is still, they are not brought into the picture during the architecture, when you're actually designing the system. Designing the system is still being done by your architect who really does not have a security background, is much more of a systems architect. And that kind of a conversation, I think, needs to occur right from the design conceptual phase, and the security person has to be involved there, and they have to be asking these tough questions, saying why. And then I do believe if you're asking those questions, you may have to have a trade-off, though. You may not get the sexiest things, but you'll be more secure. That kind of a trade-off discussion needs to happen. From what I see right now, that rarely happens at this point.
I see. No, you're right. Now, is there a framework that provides security first architecture? Is there a specific framework for that?
As far as I can tell, there is no framework that allows you to build in security and sort of build it down, though, in terms of all of your, if you're in terms of EA architecture frameworks, there is a security piece to it, whether it's, your TOGAF or Zachman and all these things. But I haven't come across wherein you sort of look at this from a different perspective and build it in, though, unfortunately.
I see. Now, what framework organizations follow commonly? Are the frameworks industry specific? What is your observation, working with the industry so far?
I think if you're talking specifically around architecture frameworks,
security.
Yeah, like I said, I think the frameworks tend to be more. When we say framework, they tend to be driven mostly by the standards, right? In terms of what a 853 says, and then you apply those controls correspondingly, or what sort of the PCI controls say, and you apply that correspondingly. I think the energy sector has also something that is kind of similar, and so that sort of drives your security framework in general, because it all comes down to what's the compliance I need to achieve, right? That's how the conversation occurs, as opposed to having a real framework. And then people apply various controls to mitigate what the control, to map those things. And that's sort of how the conversation evolves. There's really no sort of broad framework that sort of spans multiple industries, from what I can tell.
I see. I see. So what I hear is that there is no global standard for security centric architecture. Okay. Now, how do enterprises across industries lead in the development of open methodologies for managing security risk? I mean, there are many different, approaches out there. Well, how do they do that?
I mean, like I said, basically, from what I can tell you from my experience is, like they sort of follow the common methodologies, right? Whether it's sort of taking a defense in depth approach, whether it's making sure that, making sure that you have coverage across the various layers, whether it's a separation of controls, tiered architecture, and whether it's encryption of data in rest and data in motion. I mean, sort of these typical things that people do, that people follow in some fashion, right? And
Yes.
that's sort of what I see from my perspective, basically.
Okay.
I mean, standard, yeah, go ahead.
No, no, I understand, what you're saying. So do enterprises across industries speak in one language concerning their security risk using the standard taxonomy or terminology, or you see many different, terms that are out there?
I see there are many terms out there. There are some common terms that people use. I mean, I think so I think there is a reasonable understanding of the terminology. I don't think the terminology vastly varies from industry to industry in terms of security risks and security, right? I mean, most people sort of follow, whether it's, the CISSP stuff, right? I mean, things that people go through and get certified on. I mean, mostly it's sort of across industries, it's fairly common. I mean, the only thing I've seen that changes is the standards that people use in terms of the controls that they have to map across industry to industry. But the terminology itself is fairly consistent, I think. I don't see a large variation in understanding of terminology from industry to industry.
Okay. Okay. Now, we know that there is a great eagerness and excitement around building mobile first architecture or cloud first architecture, but there is very little talk about building security first architecture. And that is a great challenge, that we are facing, that security is not the focus of pretty much any entity across, nations, government, industries, organizations, academia. So that is a cause of concern. But we have to make efforts like what we are doing right now to create more awareness, more education, so that people understand the criticality of the security, and they can start thinking about security in a serious manner. So it seems that many proposals coming out of the government and industry for application development have very little requirements on security. I mean, in spite of going through all these very visible hacks that we have seen across nations, there is still not, I mean, when you receive requirement, there is not any focus on about requirements on the security so far, irrespective of whether it's government or industry.
Absolutely. I think what's exactly right. What happens is when they put out a requirement for a particular application, security is really part of the requirement. Security is usually handled as a separate proposal that's handled by the security team, which doesn't make any sense anymore. And usually the security proposals that come out are sort of a catch-all saying, and they will have something, for example, around applicant security as part of the security. But that, to me, illustrates a fundamental problem in thinking, right? It's still being viewed as a separate from your application development for a lot of organizations, because they still haven't gotten around to thinking, now this is an integral part of the whole thing. You really can't separate these functions out. You really have to think about this in a holistic way. And that is being reflected in terms of, especially in the federal government, from what I can tell, that's in terms of what the proposals, when the proposals come out, basically.
Yes. Now, many enterprises use detection-based approaches for security. While the implementation of continuous monitoring has greatly improved the security posture of many systems, these approaches rely heavily on detection strategies. However, this comes with its own risk. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, I think that's basically fundamentally that's the sort of the point I'm trying to make is detection approaches is not working though. So the continuous monitoring clearly is improved, right? Especially with big data being a little more heavily used, you're able to look at a lot more data items and you're able to look at various items though. But here is the problem: the number of false positives is still extremely high. and then you don't have enough people within your security organization to go through all of these alerts. Even if you have a SIM, you're still looking at a fairly high number of alerts that are coming down the pike, and you just don't have enough manpower here to be able to actually look at all these alerts, right? So that's a big problem and challenge that you have. And on top of that, if you add that there are more than 100,000 new malwares that are coming out from the wild, you have a serious challenge here, which is, you need to really look at a different way of handling that. And that's why I think detection, while it is working, but it's really not working all the time. And we can solely rely on detection-based systems to help us out these days. We need to rethinking and hence something like SCIT, which I talked about before, helps you sort of look at security in a different way. How do we fundamentally make it harder for the attacker to take advantage, right? Whether it's like I mentioned about SCIT, wherein you're sort of constantly rotating to pristine state. There are other things that are there going on in terms of dynamically IP hopping. People are talking about sort of changing the code during runtime. So there are these things that are going on within the moving target defense community, which I think is sort of where the future is going to be in terms of trying to fundamentally change, making it harder, making the systems more dynamic from a security perspective, and making it harder for the attacker.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But there's still a growing concern that security risk detection approaches are fighting yesterday's wars. And that is a challenge because, I mean, most of the approach that we have and the tools that we have to, for the cybersecurity, they are not effective. And like you were saying that, the initiative that you are working with currently is has a different approach that it doesn't allow hackers to stay there for more than a few minutes, and they have to continuously log in. I mean, not log in, sorry, continuously hack in, so that they, it doesn't give them enough time to gather intelligence or gather or steal anything or steal intellectual property or whatever they are after. So there are many different challenges, and most of the security tools that I have seen that are probably fighting yesterday's war. So there is a need for new tools, new security tools, and I look forward to more tools like that you have developed, so that it helps the security community achieve their goals in a more confident manner. So now, while there is a growing acknowledgement that the Internet of Things needs to be built from the bottom up with a security first architecture, only some vendors are beginning to take the issue seriously, and progress is sluggish and standards are moving very slowly to head of the emerging cybersecurity threats. This is a cause of concern when it comes to Internet of Things. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think Internet of Things is going to make the problem, a lot worse, right? Clearly, because like you said, there's really no standards around, how things are being developed on Internet of Things, right? So, and then, so that is scary. As a security professional, that scares me because now the amount of vectors that are out there to attack various systems, and especially with Internet of Things. With everything being so interconnected, it gets very problematic. I think one example I can talk about is on the healthcare. Health IT, in terms of especially medical devices, this problem has existed for a while now. Medical devices, whether it's your MRI machine or your X-ray machine, have run commodity operating systems, right? A lot of these are running old Windows XP based systems, for example. They are not being upgraded because the upgrade or patching is the responsibility of the vendor, right? Even though it is fairly easy for me as the owner of a lab, for example, to be able to patch it, the vendor of these devices have to patch it. And there is some controversy saying that if I patch my device, then I have to go back for a recertification from the FDA. So there is some sort of a misunderstanding, whatever games that are being played. That is a huge challenge, right? That is because you have pacemakers which are connected to the internet now. So bad guy now can actually can get in and do really bad things, right? Now that is an example of Internet of Things. Now he can only, now with everything being connected, that is going to get so much worse. You're depending upon lots of people. Who's going to patch these things? Okay, your refrigerator is going to be connected to the internet. Whose responsibility is patching? When does it get patched? This is so, well, it sounds great though, but these are all things that potentially will come back and haunt us in the future if you're not careful about it.
There are huge security challenges, and we have to start taking this very seriously from right now. And the lack of, I think the lack of global body, global institution that should be there, looking into these kind of affairs, because this is not just, Internet of Things is not just for United States or Europe or, Asia or, different regions like that. It's for everyone, each and every single nation, each and every single industry. So there is a very critical need for a global entity to look into these matters, to develop standards, to define different frameworks, secure frameworks. While we have an IST, and they are doing a good work on some fronts, there it is still very incomplete. There is a lot more that needs to be done to make the security architecture framework, or to make sure that Internet of Things and everything that is developing, coming our way so rapidly, that we are developing that in a secure fashion, and that we are not going too fast into the development, which would come back and haunt us, like you said. So that is a challenge, but we have to keep educating people. We have to keep having these dialogues, so that we can raise awareness about these critical issues. Now there is a growing belief that all software companies and data rich software as a service companies in particular will need to go through a paradigm shift over the next few years, as the perimeter defense of the wall companies put around a solution only go so far. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think the more and more it's sort of become a data-driven society, right? We are collecting data all over the place and all our devices and everywhere else, and people for using it for all sorts of reasons. So, and a lot of people are just not aware. Even on mobile devices, mobile applications, people are not aware. What are they storing, and how is it being stored in a secure way, or is the data being transmitted? Is your application that you downloaded from, is it transmitting your location? Do you know that's transmitting your location? The fact that it's in the application is on doesn't matter. This could be running in the background and transmitting a location. I mean, there are all of these challenges that a lot of people are just not aware of. And so this notion that we're going to have sort of this defense in depth, that's sort of, I think, old-fashioned, outdated. I think you really need to be very much more careful and ask some questions around, as me as a consumer, I think need to get a lot smarter around this, because we want, like I said, we want the new thing, we want the bright shiny thing, but we also need to be asking some tough questions around security, around these providers, especially the SaaS providers and all these providers that are providing us, making sure you have the right controls. Who has access to my data, right? If I'm using, like you said, data as a service, who's got access to my data? What controls? Who's looking at it? I mean, these are questions we typically don't ask. Hey, it's cheaper. Dropbox is cheaper than that. I'm going to go there. But are you asking these questions? So consumers need to be a little more, need to be more knowledgeable about some of these things. Yeah.
Very true. Now, Anantha, I have come across some reports that says that there are some organizations that are revamping and redesigning their entire, architecture of, their software or their system that they have been working with. Are you seeing any indication that enterprises are redesigning the entire architecture and development of a business system to be secure first?
Not in a, I mean, again, it comes down to the cost problem, right? Again, here is the ultimately, there are companies which are making those sort of decisions to revamp this, but I do also see it's not happening in any kind of a broad way, though. It is still pretty, because of the cost. The cost is still humongous. I mean, there's a lot of dependence still on legacy systems. There are a lot of legacy systems lying around, and there is still a mentality: if it's not broken, don't fix it. Right? If it's working, and there is a lot of ostrich mentality wherein they want to, hey, as long I've not been hacked, so maybe I'm safe. You'll be amazed.
Yes,
That so much of that thinking is still there, unfortunately. And the only way I guess that's going to change is they get hacked, and then there is this thing I guess, but people are still very reluctant to fundamentally, we need to go do this in a different way.
That is unfortunate. I think, probably what would wake up each and every entity who is working with softwares or developing softwares is when there are liability claims coming their way. Because of the security vulnerabilities that were there in the softwares that they develop, when the insurance companies and when the liability claims start to coming in, then I think everyone will wake up and they will start taking security more seriously. But do you think that even at that point when each and every enterprise will have the do you think they will have the ability to rethink security from the ground up? Because for those businesses who have already have their products in the market, how do they achieve security first, if they have to redesign their whole software and relaunch that? I mean,
Yeah,
apart
yeah.
from you said that it's right now because a lot of people are not interested, a lot of entities are not interested because of the cost, challenges. But once they understand that the liability claims that would come their way in the coming, years would be probably much more than the cost that they are thinking about right now in the development or revamping their security. Then probably they will start thinking. But at that point, will it be possible for them to develop that from the bottom up?
I think that's a great question, though, right? I think that's where sort of, well, I mean, clearly the cyber insurance market is still in its infancy. In terms of they're still not quite figured out. I think in terms of how do you quantify the loss at this point, right? It sort of varies and still struggling. But you're right. I think that's the future in terms of who's responsible, which piece of software is responsible, right? So for example, when the security researchers hacked the Chrysler car, so it turned out the reason they were able to get into the Chrysler car was through the speaker system. Right, there was a piece of the software running the speaker system in the car had a vulnerability that they were able to take advantage of getting the car. Now, okay, it's very challenging now, right? That's an interesting area to go. Okay, do you sue the car company? Do you sue the the speaker company? Whose responsibility is? But potentially, like you say, that will have the effect. It can go both ways. One, it may take away people will start a lot more careful when developing software. You can also argue that's going to make it a lot more restrictive in terms of new innovation coming out because people are so worried about lawsuits coming out. But on the other hand, you will also see a greater emphasis. So I think we have yet to see how this is all going to sort of play itself out. But these are interesting times as to some of these things are panning
Oh
out.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. It's going to be very interesting to see how everything gets balanced because the liability claims are going to come. It's
Yeah,
just a matter of time,
yeah,
and innovation is happening so rapidly
yeah.
in every sector, in every industry. So we'll have to see how each one of them, each entity, how they respond to those liabilities and how they decide to take the step forward and how they decide and join in the efforts to make cyber space secure. So that is the most important thing right now, and we'll have to see how that happens. But now the rapid innovations in technology and processes in the cyberspace and the industry's ability to execute it effectively is outpacing security that impacts not only cyberspace but also geospace and space. There is a growing fear that security vulnerabilities in technology brings nations critical risk of cyber attacks, massive incidents of data fraud or theft, along with massive digital information and misinformation. While digital technology has the potential to bring both good and bad, does the industry acknowledge and address the growing security challenges and risk, on the whole? Do you see that, the industry is thinking about that, that, okay, because of the things that we are developing, because of the softwares we are developing, because of how we are moving forward in the cyberspace, that we are creating these huge security challenges, and it is that would have a potential of destroying few nations probably, or probably collapsing few nations or businesses. Are they thinking from that perspective?
Not as much as you hope, I think. I mean, clearly it's changing. Clearly, there people are thinking. People are taking security a lot more seriously than they ever did. So clearly, that there is a trend towards that. But to your point, though, people are still not thinking. Not thinking that still, like you said, because of the in the accountability aspect of it, there is no right now, there is in terms of financial impact that potentially one has for a company. it's not there. So and there is no entity out there, whether it's government organization or anything, sort of imposing certain rules or restrictions, right? So it should be a lot faster, like you make the point, because we are having some really bad people out there who are getting smarter on some of these things, and who can potentially, do really bad things. So I think we should be looking at this a lot more seriously. But right now, yeah, it's slow. It's slow progress. It's progress, but it's slow.
And like you said, that unless when entities, when organizations get hacked, that's where they start thinking about security, and that is very unfortunate. But yeah, I mean that is the state right now, across the industry, and we just have to, make more effort to create the awareness and urgency about this, developing security, as a part of integral part of the software development. But now, as the information and communication technology continues to increase in strategic importance, the rapid development and deployment of these digital technologies create both independent and interdependent security risk for each component of a nation, its government, industries, organization, academia. Because what you are developing, it's not just the risk that will come to your organization, but also it has interdependencies because of the interrelationship and interconnectivity. So those in the interdependent risk, are out there. But the nature of security risk varies by the environment of the initiative, entity, or a nation, both internal and external. What are the challenges you see facing critical infrastructure across industries that is becoming a cause of concern to not only its current state, but also the survivability of the nations and the global community?
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, critical infrastructure is, whether you're looking at your, gas and what do you call? I'm sorry, your electric grids, and with more and more, smart grids and everything else, and everything being interconnected. Clearly, is a huge challenge, though. But unfortunately, and you have your old sort of SCADA systems, which are still not much has been done in those areas to actually protect them. And there's a lot of research going on about that, in terms of making sure these are safe. But right now, I think we have huge challenges in terms of, and I don't see any sort of, I mean, the government there's a lot of movement towards addressing some of these things, in terms of how new systems should be built, in terms of, building new innovation into things like SCADA systems, for example, or smart grids, for example, as to how we protect them. uh, there are all a lot of these things, right? Commodity operating systems, right? And there is sort of the processes around, when do you patch them, how do you patch them, who has access to it, how do you, all of those things are challenges that, as far as I can tell, people don't, it doesn't have a firm grasp on some of these things.
Yes, yes, you're right. Now, all of the technological advances that are helping to make the world a better place also colludes to create one of the biggest threats that nations, its government, industries, organizations, academia, and individuals alike will face in the years to come. Huge amounts of sensitive data is coming online. Virtually every aspect of our lives are or will be online. It's not just the photos we share on social media, but most of our personal information, including our financial and healthcare, is being stored in software systems somewhere else. While being able to access all of this data has made our lives easier and enabled many software as a service companies to deliver greater value, it has also exposed all of us to some huge security risks. How do we ensure security from your perspective? I mean, there are many different factors. I mean, there are independent risks, there are interdependent risks, there are no global standards right now, there are no global frameworks, that are security is not given a priority. Amidst all of this chaos around us, how do we ensure security? If you have to tell your client that, okay, they hire you, that, okay, help us make our, initiative or efforts, secure, what would you tell them?
Yeah. So I think we have to start with education, right? I think people need to ask the right questions, right? Don't assume, right? You need to ask, like I said, if you're going with like you say, it's everything's available, everything's connected. Make sure that you're asking the right questions from your vendor, saying that who's access to this information. Is it encrypted? What is the standard of encryption that you're using? and then who has access to the data is the for example, if it's classified, if it's personally identifiable information, if it's health information, how do I ensure that the people who have access? I mean, first of all, does your people maintaining the system, do they have access to the data? Why should they have access to the data? I mean, it should be only mine. Who has the keys? If it's encrypted, all of those things. These are things that people should ask some of these questions to ensure. And I also think, and also teach kids when they go to Facebook, or don't put your picture of your driver's license on Facebook. I mean, there are small things like that. So there is a lot of education that needs to occur. There has to be things around. You have to ask the tough questions around vendors in terms of what security means and how things are being stored. You have to ask those questions. And also, I think we also need to sort of don't be a little more minimalistic. I think it's great, cloud is great, everything's great. I mean, it's all going towards there, but don't just assume things anymore. Think about this, right? I mean, so in fact, we want to make the easy choices. We want to be able to everything. We want what we call the easy button. Sometimes the easy button is going to get you into a lot of trouble, so I would make sure that you're
Yes.
asking all those questions, right? I mean, my point is, look, when you go when you go to a bank and store your money in a bank, and you ask a lot of questions. I mean, these things have financial impact on people's lives. Ask the same questions. Don't just assume I'm just going to go store the stuff here because you know
Yes.
there's a lot of information there which is valuable to a lot of people.
You're right, absolutely right. So I think we are going to conclude our session here with this point of discussion. Security touches everything. It correlates to every corner of the network architecture from and software, architecture, from servers and data centers to end users and mobile applications. In spite of that, security has long been viewed as largely removed from product or system development, and instead mostly an operational concern by high growth software companies. And this is a cause of concern. When security is removed from development, it can easily become an afterthought that is focused on at the last minute or when a breach occurs. And that is a very sad state, of reality right now, where how the softwares are developed and how security is given just an afterthought, and in not much attention or focus is given on the security. So the risk group, cybersecurity risk research center and strategic security risk research center are created for the very for the very needs that we can collectively identify, evaluate, and manage the security risk facing nations, its government, industries, organizations, and academia in cyberspace, geospace, and space. And we can have key executives like Anantha, to come and have a dialogue with us, so that we can, collectively together we can identify what are the security challenges that we are facing, and what are the different, ways we can, come up with different, measures or different mitigation strategies or different ways to manage those risks. So this is our effort towards, creating better awareness, better education, so that we can collectively work together to make our cyberspace secure, so that we can have better, opportunities for innovation, better opportunities for growth and advancement. So Anantha, thank you so much for taking time to come and have a dialogue with us, and to spend, or to share your invaluable thoughts about, how we can go forward, and what are the different, security challenges, and what your efforts towards the developing the initiative that we just talked at the beginning about, the security, so that hackers do not have much time to collect more data or intelligence or whatever they're trying to steal. So we would like to, have more information in the coming months about your efforts, and how that software and how that product that you have developed, the technology that you have developed, how that is being, welcomed across nations, and how much difference it is making. Most importantly, how much difference it is making. So Anantha, thank you so much for coming and sharing all your thoughts on Risk Roundup, and we hope that in future you come again and share some more, information about your efforts and initiatives, and we would really like that.
Absolutely, Jayshree. Thank you. It was a pleasure, and thanks for the opportunity for allowing me to talk to you today. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Anantha. So let's manage the existing and emerging risks together. For more information on risk roundups, to watch the risk roundup videos, or to hear the risk roundup podcast, please go to riskgroupllc.com. Do not forget to subscribe and share. Until next time, I'm Jayshree Pandya, host of Risk Roundup, signing off. I'll see you next time.